A single page of gold and blue swirls with impossible detail. That breathtaking artistry was made by someone whose name we will likely never know. This is a journey into the shadows behind the light, to meet 30 of the most skilled and secretive artists of the Middle Ages, the master illuminators. By the end, you will understand the hidden language of these ancient books and the brilliant, anonymous minds that wrote it in color and gold. We will ask why a supreme artist would never sign their work, and how 3 brothers died before finishing the most famous book in the world. What is the first mystery from history that you hope we can solve? That anonymous master left behind a signature in every brushstroke, a style so potent it shaped an entire era. To understand their power, we must step into the opulent, politically charged world of early 15th century Paris. This was a city of warring royal factions, where a book was not just a prayer manual, but a weapon of diplomacy and a declaration of power. Into this arena stepped a patron of immense wealth and ambition, John of Lancaster, the Duke of Bedford. He was regent of France for his infant nephew, the English king, ruling from a conquered Paris. His commission was for a book of hours, a personal prayer book, but it was destined to be something far greater. It became the Bedford Hours, a manuscript of staggering luxury that served as a portable cathedral of art and propaganda. And the artist he entrusted with this monumental task is known to us only as the master of the Bedford Hours. The pages of this book are a feast for the senses, a ride of color and gold that leaps from the parchment. The master's style is instantly recognizable. He framed his biblical scenes within elaborate architectural borders, like looking through the stone tracery of a Gothic window into a sacred moment. His colors are deep and jewel-like emerald greens, ruby reds, and a lapis lazuli blue so expensive it was worth its weight in gold, but it is in the margins where his personality truly shines. Scrolling vines and delicate flowers give way to playful, often hilarious scenes called drolleries. Here, knights joust with snails, monkeys mimic human priests, and rabbits play the lute. This whimsy served a purpose, offering a moment of levity and earthly delight amidst the solemn prayers, a reminder of the world outside the chapel walls. Yet the central mystery remains. In an age where some artists were beginning to achieve personal fame, why did this undisputed genius never sign their name? The leading theory connects them directly to another giant of the time, the Boucicaut master, named for the magnificent Book of Hours he made for the French marshal Jean Lemanger. The styles are close cousins. Scholars believe our master likely trained in or even ran the Boucicaut workshop in Paris. But when the Duke of Bedford needed his own book, perhaps this artist struck out on his own, following his powerful patron across the channel to London. His anonymity, then, might not be a matter of modesty, but of branding. He was the head of a major atelier, a production house. His signature was the consistent, breathtaking quality that flowed from his workshop, a collective identity that guaranteed excellence to the richest nobles in Europe. He was not a lone genius, but the creative director of a medieval super studio, his name lost to history because his business was the art itself. That master of the Bedford Hours perfected a style, but he did not invent it. The artistic revolution that made his work possible began almost a century earlier, with a man whose name we are fortunate to know, Jean Pucelle. In the early 1300s, most Parisian illuminators worked in a brilliantly flat, decorative style. Figures stood against solid gold or patterned backgrounds, more like elegant symbols than real beings in space. Then came Pucelle, a painter who dared to ask a simple, radical question. What if a painted page could feel like a window? His answer transformed European art. He looked south, beyond the Alps, to the revolutionary work of Sienese painters like Duccio. From them, he borrowed 2 powerful, alien concepts, spatial depth and chiaroscuro. Suddenly, his miniature scenes had floors that receded into the distance, and buildings that created believable corners. Most astonishingly, his figures were modeled with light and shadow. A fold in a robe wasn't just a line, it was a deep crevice of darkness next to a ridge of light, making the fabric feel heavy and real. This was a seismic shift, moving illumination from pure decoration towards pictorial realism. We can see this genius fully realized in his surviving masterpiece, the Belleville Breviary. Here, Pucelle made another stunning choice. For the major illustrations, he largely abandoned color, painting instead in exquisite shades of gray, a technique called grisaille. It might sound like a limitation, but it was a revelation. By stripping away color, he forced the viewer to focus entirely on form, on the dramatic play of light, and on the profound emotional gravity of the scene. A depiction of the mourning Virgin Mary in grisaille isn't just pretty, it is sculptural, solemn, and heartbreakingly immediate. It feels less like a decoration and more like a small, precious painting in stone, connecting directly to the monumental statuary of Gothic cathedrals. This was high art for a private devotion, a silent, powerful meditation, which leads us to a compelling mystery. How did a Parisian craftsman in the 1320s encounter the cutting-edge styles of Siena, Italy? Paris and Siena were worlds apart. There were no art books, no digital images, not even reliable prints. The transmission of style required the movement of people or object. One persuasive theory points to the French royal court itself. The Queen of France during Pucelle's early career was Jeanne Burgundy, a noted patron of the arts. It is possible that through diplomatic gifts, or perhaps even through an Italian artist visiting Paris, Pucelle saw Sienese panel paintings or drawings that opened his eyes to a new way of seeing. He didn't copy them, he absorbed their principles and then translated them onto the intimate scale of vellum, creating a hybrid style that was entirely his own. The impact of his small workshop was monumental. Jean Pucelle did not work in obscurity. His atelier produced luxury books for the highest echelons of French society, including the royal family. His innovations, that blend of Northern Gothic elegance with Italianate spatial awareness, became the foundation for everything that followed. He planted the seed for what scholars would later call the International Gothic style, a fluid, courtly aesthetic that would flow across Europe for the next 100 years, influencing masters from Prague to Milan. So while the Bedford master remained anonymous, his artistic lineage traces directly back to this one named pioneer, a man who taught Paris and then all of Europe how to paint with light. The revolution Pucelle began would find its most elegant expression in the hands of another anonymous genius, an artist known only by the name of his most famous patron. This is the Boucicaut master, the head of the dominant artistic workshop in Paris during the early 1400s. If Jean Pucelle opened the window, the Boucicaut master invited us to step through it, into a world of air, light, and profound human feeling. His workshop was a commercial and creative powerhouse, producing some of the most sought-after luxury manuscripts for the French nobility. Their signature style is one of breathtaking delicacy and innovation. The figures are slender and graceful, moving with a naturalism that feels alive, but the true breakthrough lies in the backgrounds. Where earlier artists used flat gold or simple patterns, the Boucicaut master painted landscapes that recede into a hazy blue-gray distance. This technique, called atmospheric perspective, mimics how the eye actually sees, with colors fading and details softening as they move toward the horizon. For the first time in a Northern European manuscript, a biblical scene was set not in a symbolic space, but in a believable world under a real sky. The emotional depth of these scenes is equally revolutionary. Look at a page from the Boucicaut Hours, the manuscript made for the celebrated French marshal Jean Le Manger. In a scene of the Nativity, the master doesn't just show the Holy Family, he conveys a mood of tender, quiet intimacy. The Virgin Mary's posture, the soft light pooling in the stable, the attentive animals, all work together to create a moment of serene contemplation that the viewer is invited to share. This focus on emotional narrative was a monumental shift. It transformed the illuminated page from a beautiful diagram of a story into a window onto a lived experience. Yet this raises the central mystery surrounding this master. Was the Boucicaut master a single visionary painter, or was it the brand name for a highly coordinated and brilliant atelier? The consistency of style across multiple major manuscripts suggests a strong guiding hand, a master designer who set the compositions and painted the most important faces and figures. But the sheer volume of work, with its intricate borders and detailed miniatures, required a team of specialized artists, perhaps including the young apprentice who would later become the Bedford master. This workshop model explains both the high quality and the widespread influence. It was a factory for beauty, training the next generation while satisfying the demands of a wealthy clientele. The influence of this Parisian workshop rippled far beyond the city's walls. Art historians see a direct line from the Boucicaut masters' attempts at realistic space and light to the groundbreaking work of the Flemish painters in the Netherlands, artists like Jan van Eyck. The careful observation of light on surfaces, the interest in domestic interiors, and the emotional resonance of religious scenes, all these seeds were sown in the Parisian workshops years before they bloomed in Ghent and Bruges. So while we search for a name, the legacy of the Boucicaut master is written in the very evolution of European art. He proved that the smallest of canvases, a page of vellum, could carry the weight of a world trying to be born, a world striving to see itself not as a symbol, but as a truth. And this pursuit of truth would soon lead another illuminator into a shadowy realm of political intrigue, where art became a tool for survival in a kingdom tearing itself apart. While the Boucicaut master perfected a style, three young brothers from the Netherlands would take that vision and push it to its absolute, breathtaking limit. Paul Hermann and Gina Limbourg were not just illuminators. They were the rock stars of their age, handpicked by the most extravagant art collector in Europe, Jean, Duke of Berry. The Duke was a prince of the French royal blood, a man whose passion for beauty was matched only by his immense wealth and his notoriously poor political judgment. His palaces were crammed with jewels, tapestries, exotic animals, and most of all, books. For this demanding patron, the Limbourg Brothers produced a series of increasingly lavish manuscripts, culminating in a project that would define their legacy and end in profound tragedy, the Tres Riches Heures, the very rich hour. What they achieved in its pages was nothing short of a revolution in observation. Earlier masters had begun to paint landscapes, but the Limbourgs painted specific, identifiable places. For the calendar pages that are the manuscript's glory, they did not paint generic scenes of farming or feasting. They painted the Duke's own castles, his actual properties, rendered with an architectural precision that feels almost like a portrait. The scene for February shows a snow-covered farmstead, with peasants huddling by a fire inside a crude hut, their breath visible in the frigid air, while sheep huddle in a fold and a lone figure trudges through the deep snow. The detail is anthropological, a freezing, intimate glimpse of medieval winter you can almost feel. The page for June shows the Palais de la Cité in Paris, with laborers mowing a hayfield in the foreground, their movements studied and real, and the Seine River bustling with boats in the distance. This was a radical new idea, the illumination as a documentary record of both aristocratic power and everyday life, all woven together in a single, glorious image. The brothers' technique was equally advanced. Their colors are luminous, their use of gold lavish but precise, and their ability to depict different textures, from embroidered silk to muddy earth, is unparalleled. They created a world that was at once idealized and utterly convincing, a testament to the Duke's dominion and to their own genius for seeing. And then, with their masterpiece perhaps half finished, the story stopped. In the year 1416, a great plague swept through Europe. Paul, Hermann, and Gina Limbourg, all in the prime of their lives and careers, died suddenly, almost certainly victims of the pandemic. Their great patron, the Duke of Berry, died just a few months later. The Tres Riches Heures was left incomplete, a stunning fragment of what might have been. The unfinished pages, with their sketched outlines waiting for color that would never come, are among the most poignant artifacts in art history. The mystery of their final vision hangs in those empty spaces. Would the remaining calendar scenes have been even more detailed? What other of the Duke's castles would they have immortalized? Their sudden vanishing created a vacuum in European art. The torch of innovation they carried, that blend of northern detail and Italianate space, would be picked up decades later by another artist, but in a different kingdom, under the shadow of a very different kind of power. The unfinished pages of the Tres Riches Heures marked not an end, but a dispersal. As the Limbourg Brothers' workshop fell silent, their advanced style did not vanish. It traveled, carried by artists who fled a Paris increasingly gripped by war and plague. One of the most fascinating of these artistic refugees is known only as the Master of the Brussels initials. Active in the turbulent years around 1400, this master specialized in a form that was both traditional and revolutionary, the historiated initial. These were not mere decorative letters. Under this artist's brush, the opening letter of a psalm or prayer would swell into a lavish miniature panel painting, a self-contained world often taller than your thumb. Imagine a grand, gilded letter B, whose interior curves frame a complete scene of the Nativity, with every figure, animal, and architectural detail rendered in jewel-like colors against a solid ground of burnished gold leaf. The effect is one of concentrated opulence, a burst of sacred drama embedded directly into the text. The mystery of this master, however, lies in the geography of their style. While their technique of precise drawing and enamel-like color is deeply rooted in the French tradition of Pucelle and the Limbourgs, the spirit within those initials feels distinctly Italian. The figures have a new solidity and weight, their gestures more dramatic and expressive. The architectural settings within the letters often resemble the classical-inspired loggias of Siena or Florence, not the soaring Gothic arches of Paris. This presents us with a compelling puzzle. Was the master of the Brussels initials a French artist who traveled to Italy and was transformed by what they saw? Or were they an Italian painter who came north to Paris, mastering the local craft while infusing it with a southern sensibility? The evidence points to a truly peripatetic career, perhaps working for a time in the papal court in Avignon, a cultural crossroads where French and Italian artists mingled. Their work represents a crucial, early fusion at the very dawn of the Renaissance. They took the Northern European love for intricate detail and luminous color and married it to the Italian pursuit of spatial coherence and humanist emotion. This was not a simple copy, but a sophisticated synthesis, creating a hybrid visual language that appealed to an international, cultured elite. By packing this revolutionary fusion into the compact space of an initial, the master ensured their ideas would be encountered intimately, page after page, by the reader at prayer. Their contribution was a quiet, portable bridge between two great artistic worlds, proving that the seeds of the Renaissance were carried not only on large panels, but in the gilded letters of a prayer book. And as this new style took root, it would find its most powerful patron not in a king, but in a man who used books as his personal propaganda machine, a duke whose library was a fortress of ambition. The silence left by the Limbourg brothers was not empty for long. Into that void stepped another master, a figure we now call the Master of the Duke of Bedford, or more simply, the Bedford Master. It is crucial to distinguish this artist from the earlier master we discussed, the Master of the Bedford Hours. While both worked for the same powerful English patron, they are separated by a generation and a distinct artistic vision. This later Bedford master emerged as the leading artistic force in Paris in the 1420s and 30s, heading one of the largest and most prolific workshops of the era. And his career became irrevocably linked to the unfinished masterpiece on his desk, the Tres Riches Huras of the Duke of Berry. When the Duke and the Limbourg brothers died in 1416, the glorious book was a heartbreaking collection of both finished marvels and bare pencil sketches. Someone had to complete it. The task fell to this new Bedford master, likely commissioned by the Duke's heir, but completing another artist's vision is one of the most delicate challenges in all of art. The Bedford master approached it with reverence, but also with his own unmistakable style. Where the Limbourgs were pioneers of observed reality, the Bedford master was a master of elegant decoration. His contributions to the calendar pages are telling. Look at the month of October, a scene of sowing, and the Louvre in the background. The landscape is flatter, more schematic. The figures are stiffer, their movements more like graceful poses than the natural labor captured in the Limbourg's June. The colors are still rich, but the overall effect is more formal, more like a beautiful tapestry than a window onto a living world. He finished what the brothers began, but he did not try to mimic their revolutionary naturalism. This creates the central mystery of the book. How much of what we admire is truly the Limbourgs, and how much is the Bedford master's elegant completion? Scholars painstakingly compare brushstrokes, architectural details, and facial types across the pages, a detective story in pigment and gold, trying to separate the hand of genius across a gulf of plague and time. His own independent works, however, leave no doubt about his supreme talent and his workshop's industrial output. For his namesake patron, John Duke of Bedford, he produced monumental volumes like the magnificent Bedford Psalter and Hours. These books are spectacles of opulent design. The pages are framed by borders of incredible intricacy, filled with scrolling acanthus leaves, delicate flowers, and the patron's heraldic symbols, all rendered in vibrant colors and lavish gold. The miniatures themselves are often set within elaborate architectural frames, like altarpieces in miniature. The figures are dignified, beautifully dressed, and arranged in balanced, harmonious compositions. It is a style meant to impress, to convey power, piety, and immense wealth. This was not the art of intimate discovery, but of majestic display. The Bedford master's workshop became a factory for this kind of luxury, producing books for the highest nobility across both England and France. His ability to systematize such complex beauty speaks to a brilliant managerial mind, an artistic CEO who could delegate and oversee while maintaining a breathtaking standard. In a way, his completion of the Tres Riches Heuris symbolizes a broader shift. He closed the book on the Limbourg's explosive, experimental moment and ushered in an age where illumination became a more standardized, though no less magnificent, courtly commodity. Yet even as this style dominated the courts, a quieter, more intense form of devotion was being painted in the remote monasteries of another land, where the goal was not to display wealth, but to dissolve the self in a blaze of divine geometry. While the Bedford master crafted a world of courtly elegance, a very different kind of light was being painted in the same era, a light that felt like a spiritual emergency. In the shadows of early 15th century France, an artist known only as the Rohan master created some of the most raw and emotionally devastating images in all of medieval art. We know them by their masterpiece, the Rohan Hours, a book of prayers where every page seems to tremble with fear, awe, and a desperate longing for salvation. This master style is a world away from the delicate landscapes and pretty borders of their contemporaries. Forget graceful figures and harmonious scenes. The Rohan master paints with a wrenching, expressionistic power. Their figures are elongated, almost gaunt, their faces etched with profound anguish or ecstatic vision. The colors are stark and dramatic, deep blues and blood reds, set against chilling expanses of bare parchment that feel less like empty space and more like a void. Nowhere is this more potent than in their scenes of death and divine judgment. One of the most famous miniatures shows the moment of death. A dying man lies in bed, his soul, depicted as a small, naked child, being drawn from his mouth by a menacing demon on one side and a hopeful angel on the other, while the grim figure of death itself, a skeletal archer, lets fly an arrow from the doorway. The composition is chaotic, claustrophobic, and utterly gripping. It is not a theological diagram, it is a visceral nightmare, a direct appeal to the viewer's own mortal terror. This leads us directly to the central mystery of this master. Who are they painting for? Such intense, inward-looking art seems ill-suited for display in a noble court. The prevailing theory is that the Rohan master was deeply connected to a monastic milieu, perhaps working for a devout, reform-minded patron like the book's presumed owner, a member of the Rohan family, or even for a monastic order itself. The style echoes the emotional sermons of preachers who emphasize personal sin and the urgency of repentance, themes that resonated powerfully during the relentless turmoil of the 100 Years' War. This was an age of constant insecurity, of marauding armies, peasant revolts, and the ever-present shadow of the plague. The Rohan master did not offer pretty escapism. They held up a mirror to the collective anxiety of their time, translating the chaos of the world into the spiritual drama of the soul. Their work is a stark reminder that illumination was not always about celebrating earthly power. In the hands of this anonymous genius, it became a tool for the most profound introspection, a painted prayer so powerful it feels like a scream or a sob on the page. And this intense, personal approach to faith would soon find a home in a very different region, where artists began to see the divine not in visions of terror, but in the meticulous beauty of the everyday world. Far from the emotional storms of the Rohan master, a different kind of fusion was taking place in the sunlit courts of northern Italy. In the fertile region of Lombardy during the late 1300s, an artist known only as the master of the Harvard Hannibal crafted pages of astonishing complexity and quiet mystery. Their sole-named work, a magnificent copy of the Roman historian Livy's History of Rome, is a testament to a mind that existed at a precise crossroads of culture. This is not a prayer book, but a secular text of ancient military history, commissioned by a learned, worldly patron who wanted the epic tales of Rome's wars brought to life. The master's style is a fascinating hybrid. From the Northern Gothic tradition, likely absorbed through imported French manuscripts, they borrowed an obsession with intricate detail. Their battle scenes are not chaotic blurs, but meticulously organized tableaus. You can count the individual links in a knight's chainmail, see the specific breeds of horses, and discern the different heraldic devices on 100 tiny shields. The borders swirl with delicate ivy and impossibly small, realistic flowers, a direct echo of Parisian workshops, yet the space in which these details exist feels fundamentally Italian. The figures are solid and grounded, their movements purposeful and balanced. The master often sets scenes within architectural frameworks of rounded arches and classical columns, using perspective to create shallow, stage-like spaces they have ordered the martial chaos. This creates a compelling visual tension, as if a French miniature has been carefully remounted within an Italian fresco. The central enigma of this master is their profound isolation. No other manuscript from the time or region looks quite like the Harvard Hannibal. This singularity sparks the enduring question: was the artist a French illuminator who traveled to Lombardy, bringing their northern toolkit to an Italian court? Or were they a native Italian painter who studied northern models so deeply that they mastered and internalized a foreign aesthetic? The evidence leans toward the latter. While the detail is northern, the underlying sense of form, the weight of the bodies, and the treatment of space feel intrinsically Italian, suggesting a local artist who selectively adopted and translated northern motifs to create something entirely new for a sophisticated patron. This patron likely wanted a book that reflected both their classical learning and their fashionable international taste. The master's scenes of courtly life within Livy's history are particularly telling, showing nobles in contemporary Italian dress engaging in dignified conversation, blending the ancient past with the cultured present. Their work stands as a solitary, brilliant experiment, a single manuscript that captures a fleeting moment of artistic exchange before the full tide of the Renaissance would wash such intricate Gothic detail away in favor of a new unified vision. And as the 15th century progressed, that new vision would find one of its most powerful expressions not in a book of history, but in a book of hours made for a man who traded in money, not titles, a merchant whose piety was painted in the clear, hard light of the Italian Renaissance. Gold could be a window to heaven, or it could be a magnificent wall. In the bustling artistic hubs of the Netherlands during the 1440s and 50s, one master chose the latter, creating a style of pure, unabashed luxury. Known only as the master of the Golden Scrolls, this artist and their workshop specialized in a visual signature so distinct you can spot it across a room. Their backgrounds are not landscapes of sky and earth, but dense, shimmering fields of color, deep blues, rich reds, or lush greens, upon which they laid intricate tooled patterns of golden vines and flowers. This scrollwork, meticulously punched and patterned into the gold leaf, catches the light from every angle, making the page itself seem to glow from within. It is decoration raised to the level of sublime artifice, a deliberate rejection of the pictorial depth that artists like the Limbourgs had pioneered. The figures in these miniatures, often elegant and graceful, seem to exist not in a world, but upon a stage of radiant, abstract beauty. This is not a retreat from skill, but a confident assertion of a different value, splendor. The workshop of the Golden Scrolls was a commercial juggernaut, producing a staggering number of books of hours, primarily for the wealthy bourgeois and courtly clients connected to the powerful Duchy of Burgundy. Their books became a kind of luxury brand, a guaranteed product of exquisite craftsmanship and fashionable taste. If you were a rising merchant in Ghent or a courtier in Brussels, owning a Golden Scrolls manuscript was a clear statement of your refined status and your ability to afford the very best. This very success, however, deepens the central mystery surrounding them. With such a prolific output, why can we not pin down their location? The style is Franco-Flemish, a blend typical of the region, but specific clues are maddeningly scarce. Some scholars argue for Bruges, then a cosmopolitan center of trade and art. Others point to the political and cultural gravity of Ghent. Still others find evidence in the heraldry and textual details that suggest a base in Lille. The workshop may have even moved between these centers, following patronage and opportunity. Their anonymity feels less like that of a solitary genius, and more like the faceless efficiency of a supremely successful atelier, where a consistent branded look was more important than any individual artist's name. In prioritizing radiant surface over spatial illusion, the master of the Golden Scrolls catered perfectly to an aristocratic taste that desired awe before introspection. Their pages ask not to be looked through, but to be looked at, to be admired as objects of precious devotion in themselves. They remind us that in the 15th century, the value of a book was often measured quite literally by the weight of its gold and the dazzle of its craft. And yet, even as this style flourished, a quiet revolution was occurring in the very materials that made such splendor possible, a revolution led by an illuminator who understood that the most profound light could come from the humblest of brushes. But gold leaf and intricate scrollwork were not the only path to beauty in the Netherlands. A generation later, a different kind of light began to glow from the workshops of Ghent and Bruges, a light that felt like the quiet hour before sunset. This is the world of the master of the Dresden Prayer Book, an artist whose name is lost, but whose serene vision perfectly captures the sophisticated, introspective mood of the 1470s. If the master of the Golden Scrolls built walls of splendor, this master opened windows onto a peaceful, intimate world. Their style is the essence of delicate miniaturism. The figures are slender and graceful, their faces often turned in gentle profile, lost in quiet prayer or contemplation. They favored a palette of soft, pastel colors, dusty pinks, muted greens, and hazy blues that feel more atmospheric than decorative. And for the first time in a major way since the Limbourg Brothers, landscapes returned to the forefront, but transformed. These are not the specific castles of a duke, but idealized visions of nature, serene meadows dotted with flowers, gentle rivers winding toward distant blue mountains, and skies filled with a luminous, pearly light. It is a world perfected, a spiritual retreat painted on vellum. All of this culminates in their namesake masterpiece, the Dresden Prayer Book. Opening its pages feels like stepping into a private garden of devotion. Each miniature is a small, self-contained world of peace. A scene of the Virgin Mary reading in a sun-drenched chamber is so calm you can almost hear the silence. The light falls through a leaded glass window, pooling on the tiled floor and illuminating the pages of her book. A moment of everyday sanctity rendered with breathtaking tenderness. This was a new kind of piety for a new kind of patron, one who valued private meditation and aesthetic refinement as much as public display. The enduring mystery surrounding this master is their exact place in the explosive artistic ecosystem of the time. Ghent and Bruges in the 1470s were home to revolutionary panel painters like Hugo van der Goes, whose altarpieces were renowned for their deep psychological intensity and complex landscapes. Look at a face in the Dresden Prayer Book, then look at a portrait by van der Goes. The emotional resonance, the careful modeling of features in soft light, the sense of an inner life, the parallels are striking. So, was our master a direct follower of van der Goes, translating the painter's monumental style to the tiny scale of a manuscript? Or were they a peer, a collaborator even, moving in the same circles and absorbing the same revolutionary ideas? Some scholars go further, suggesting a tantalizing link to another shadowy giant, the master of Mary of Burgundy, the illuminator of the most luxurious book of hours of the age. The stylistic connections are subtle but persuasive. In the treatment of space within architectural borders, and the exquisite rendering of still life details like books and flowers. It is possible our master worked within that prestigious workshop before developing their own, more pastoral signature. This is their true historical significance. The master of the Dresden Prayer Book stands at a vital crossroads. They were not merely an illuminator, but a crucial translator, one of the key artists who actively imported the advanced techniques of early Netherlandish panel painting, the atmospheric landscapes, the psychological depth, the studied naturalism directly into the realm of the manuscript. In their hands, the painted page ceased to be a separate art form and became a direct sibling to the oil painting on the chapel wall. Their serene miniatures are the final, exquisite flowering of the medieval illuminated manuscript, just as the winds of the Renaissance began to blow the old forms away. And as that new wind gathered force, it would carry the art of illumination to a place where it would face its greatest challenge, not from a change in style, but from a revolutionary machine that could replicate words with mechanical precision. The serene light of the Dresden master was a prelude to a final, dazzling explosion of artistry. In the opulent court of Burgundy during the 1470s, an illuminator of unparalleled genius created what many consider the single most beautiful book of hours in existence. We know them only as the Master of Mary of Burgundy, named for their most famous patron, the young duchess whose tragic life would be briefly illuminated by their work. Their masterpiece, the Vienna Hours of Mary of Burgundy, is not merely a painted book. It is a philosophical puzzle about sight, faith, and reality crafted on vellum. The revolution begins not in the central miniature, but in the border. Earlier masters filled margins with decorative vines or playful drolleries. This master did something astonishing. They painted the borders to look like the actual edge of the book's parchment, and then, resting upon that simulated parchment, they placed objects so real you feel you could pick them up. A string of rosary beads, each pearl catching a different highlight, spills into the margin. A delicate gold pendant lies beside a sprig of violets, their petals beginning to wilt. Most famously, a common housefly seems to have landed on the page, its iridescent wings rendered with such microscopic detail that viewers for centuries have tried to brush it away. This technique, a trompe-l'oeil or trick of the eye, shatters the boundary between the viewer's world and the sacred world of the image. It is an invitation into a private, devotional space. You are not looking at a picture of the Virgin Mary, you are peering through a window into her chamber, while the Duchess's own prayer beads lie forgotten on the sill before you. This creates an intimacy so profound it feels like trespassing on a prayer. The central miniatures deepen this spiritual illusion. In one breathtaking scene, Mary of Burgundy herself is shown reading a book of hours in a chapel. Through a stone window next to her, we see a church interior where the same Virgin Mary, now as a holy figure, is enthroned with the Christ child. The Duchess in the foreground is literally looking at a vision of the divine that we, the bookholder, also see. It is a dizzying layering of realities, a meditation on how devotion bridges the earthly and the heavenly. All of this artistry swirls around a deep and poignant mystery. Who is this master? The style is intimately connected to the greatest Flemish panel painters of the day. The luminous light, the palpable textures, the psychological depth of the figures, all point directly to the circle of Hugo van der Goes, the brilliant but tormented painter whose own mental breakdown was recorded at the time. Could the illuminator actually have been van der Goes himself, finding a more intimate outlet for his vision during a period of fragility? Other clues point in a different direction toward Lieven van Latham, a renowned goldsmith and manuscript designer documented in the Burgundian court. The illusionistic borders, with their meticulously rendered jewels and metallic objects, speak to a goldsmith's eye for reflective surfaces and precise detail. Perhaps the truth is a collaboration, a meeting of minds between a painter's soul and a goldsmith's hand. The mystery endures because the artist, like so many before, chose to let the work speak alone. The Vienna Hours remains a solitary, perfect artifact, a final summit of medieval illumination where craft, theology, and illusion merge into one silent, breathtaking prayer. And as this tradition reached its peak, a new invention was spreading from Mainz that would challenge the very reason for its existence, promising to make books for the many, not just the priceless treasures for the few. The illusionistic fly on the page of Mary of Burgundy's book is a final, perfect deception. Yet the true revolution in the story of illumination was not a trick of paint, but a shift in the very identity of the artist, from an anonymous master to a documented professional. This brings us to a rare figure in our gallery of shadows, a man whose name we actually know, Willem Vreeland. In the bustling port city of Bruges during the mid-15th century, Vreeland was not just an illuminator, he was a brand. He had moved from Utrecht in the north, drawn by the magnetic pull of Bruges, which had become the commercial manuscript capital of Europe. This was a city run by merchants and bankers, where art was a commodity traded alongside wool and spices, and Vreeland became its most successful supplier. He ran a large, organized workshop, more like a modern design studio than a medieval scriptorium, employing multiple artists and serving a clientele of wealthy burghers, court officials, and foreign dignitaries. His business was so well known that his name appears in civic records, not as a mystical creator, but as a taxpayer and a guild member. In the world of illumination, this was a seismic change. Vreeland's style is a reflection of his commercial savvy. It is robust, clear, and brilliantly decorative, designed to satisfy a broad and demanding market. His figures are solid and expressive, often dressed in the sumptuous fabrics of the Burgundian court. His storytelling is direct and easy to follow, with compositions that guide the eye effortlessly through a scene. And his pages are framed by borders of incredible lushness, thick with acanthus leaves, flowers, and sometimes heraldic shields, all rendered in deep, saturated colors and generous gold. You can see this signature style in a grand commission like the Chroniques de Hainaut, a history of the county of Hainaut. In its pages, Vreeland and his team illustrate battles, court ceremonies, and historical events. The scenes are packed with activity, the colors are vibrant, and every inch of the page is utilized to create an effect of opulent narrative. This is not the intimate, psychological art of the Dresden master. It is public storytelling of the highest quality, meant to impress and inform. And this very success creates the fascinating lesser mystery that surrounds Willem Vreeland. Because we have his name, we might think we have solved the puzzle. But the opposite is true. With a workshop of his scale, producing hundreds of manuscripts over decades, the real challenge for scholars is this: which brushstrokes are from the master's own hand, and which are the work of his talented employees following his established model. When you look at a page from the Chroniques de Hainaut, are you seeing Vreeland's personal genius, or the excellent execution of his workshop standard style? This is the paradox of the businessman artist. His name guaranteed a product of consistent luxury, but it may also obscure the individual artist within the successful enterprise. Vreeland represents the final, professionalized phase of the medieval illuminators' world, a world on the cusp of being changed forever by the silent, mechanical press waiting in a German workshop. Willem Vreeland's successful workshop was built on a clear, commercial style, but the true artistic soul of the Burgundian court may have belonged to a man working in the shadows behind the throne. Leven van Latham is a rare case, an illuminator whose name survives in court payment records from the 1460s and 70s, documenting his service to the Dukes of Burgundy. This was the absolute peak of Burgundian power and luxury, and Van Latham was right at its heart, first in Antwerp and later in the ducal stronghold of Ghent. Unlike the anonymous masters we have followed, here we have a name, but this name, instead of solving a mystery, has ignited one of the most passionate debates in the history of art. The question is direct and tantalizing. Was Leven van Latham the anonymous genius we call the Master of Mary of Burgundy? The evidence begins with the documents. We know Van Latham was paid by the court, and we know he was highly regarded. We also know the style of the artist who painted the Vienna Hours for the young Duchess. That style is defined by an almost microscopic precision, a breathtaking ability to render textures, from the soft nap of velvet to the hard sparkle of gemstones, and those revolutionary trompe-l'oeil borders with their illusionistic prayer beads and insect. Now, look at a manuscript securely attributed to Van Latham, like the magnificent Histoire de Charles Martel. a secular history of the Frankish military hero. The connection is startling. The pages are alive with the same precise detail. Armor is depicted with every rivet and engraved line. Fabrics fall in heavy, realistic folds, and the landscapes, though serving a historical narrative, are observed with the same careful eye for nature. The figures have a solidity and dignity that feels directly related to the devotional figures in the Vienna Hours. Stylistically, the leap seems small. Both artists share a profound understanding of light and a goldsmith's obsession with surface detail. This has led many scholars to make the compelling argument that they are one and the same, that Lieven van Latham, the documented court artist, was the master of Mary of Burgundy. His documented career aligns perfectly with the timeline of the Duchess's life and the creation of her famous book, but the mystery deepens with a counterargument. Other experts point to subtle distinctions: the emotional intensity in the faces of the Vienna Hours, that deep, introspective piety can feel more psychologically acute than the noble, but more formal, expressions in Van Latham's secular histories. Could this mean the Vienna Hours was painted by a different, even more gifted artist in the same court circle, perhaps one who specialized in devotional intimacy? Or does it simply show one master adapting his sublime skill to different genres, bringing a more public, heroic tone to a history book and a more private, visionary tone to a prayer book? The debate remains wonderfully unresolved. What the secure works of Lieven van Latham undeniably show is a master collaborator. The Histoire de Charles Martel was not a solo project. He worked closely with the premier scribe of the Burgundian court, David Aubert, and the evidence suggests he may have directed other artists in his workshop to help complete the hundreds of required miniatures. This image of Van Latham is crucial. He was not a solitary monk in a cell, but a managing partner in a high-stakes creative enterprise, coordinating scribes, illustrators, and perhaps panel painters to produce unified works of art for the most demanding patrons in Europe. Whether or not he painted that iconic fly on Mary of Burgundy's page, his documented career gives us our clearest picture yet of the ecosystem that produced such miracles, a world of named professionals working in concert under the glittering pressure of a ducal court. And as this system reached its zenith, a technological tremor was already being felt, one that would not erase the Illuminators' art, but forever change its purpose. While Lieven van Latham's name survives in account books, another artist of the era was celebrated in poetry. His contemporaries called him the Prince of Illuminators, a title of respect that has echoed down the centuries. Simon Marmion was a rare figure who moved with equal mastery between two worlds, that of the large-scale panel painting and the intimate page of vellum. Based in the prosperous towns of Valenciennes and later Amiens, he ran a prestigious workshop that served the highest nobility of France and Burgundy. His style is instantly recognizable for its profound, poetic softness. Where other masters painted with crisp lines and brilliant colors, Marmion painted with atmosphere. His landscapes are bathed in a hazy, golden light, with distant cities melting into a misty blue horizon. His figures are not sharply drawn, but seem to emerge from this luminous air, their faces often touched with a gentle, melancholic expression. He had a particular genius for creating mood, turning a scene of the Nativity into a moment of hushed, pre-dawn wonder, or a depiction of a saint's life into a poignant human drama set against an endless, dreaming sky. This very beauty, however, creates the central puzzle of Simon Marmion's legacy. He was famous in his lifetime, praised by poets, and his panel paintings, like the magnificent altarpiece for the Church of St. Bertin, are documented and survive. But when it comes to the luxurious manuscripts attributed to him, we step into a realm of elegant uncertainty. Dozens of breathtaking books from the late 1400s are said to be by his hand or his workshop, based purely on the unmistakable softness of their style. Yet very few have any solid documentation linking them directly to him. This makes every attribution a compelling act of detective work. Scholars must compare the treatment of a distant mountain in a signed panel painting the same mountain in a miniature, or match the particular sorrow in the face of a Virgin Mary across two different mediums. Two manuscripts stand at the heart of this attribution mystery. The first is a copy of the Grandes Chroniques de France, A History of the French Kings. The miniatures in this book are spectacular narratives, full of courtly ceremony and dramatic events. The landscapes have Marmion's signature atmospheric depth, and the figures move with a dignified grace that feels entirely his. If this is his work, it shows his ability to translate his poetic vision onto the stage of national history. The second, and perhaps more persuasive candidate, is The Hours of Isabella the Catholic, a book of hours made for the formidable Queen of Spain. Here, the Marmionesque style is in full, glorious flower. The pages glow with that soft, interior light. In a scene of the Annunciation, the angel seems to materialize from a beam of sunlight filled with swirling dust motes, and the Virgin's chamber opens onto one of those serene, infinite landscapes. The emotional tone is one of quiet intensity, perfectly suited for the private devotion of a powerful queen. So why does the documentary proof remain so elusive? Part of the answer lies in the workshop system itself. The Prince of Illuminators was first and foremost the head of a major atelier. A patron ordering a book from Simon Marmion was commissioning the brand, the guaranteed aesthetic, knowing the master would design the most important scenes and oversee the work. The actual application of paint to many pages might be done by skilled assistants following as exquisite models. This blurring of hands does not diminish his genius, it defines it. He was the creative source, the one who established the luminous, atmospheric style that made his workshop's output so desirable. To own a Marmion manuscript, documented or not, was to hold a piece of that poetic light in your hands, a light that would soon find itself competing with a new, brighter, and far less forgiving source of illumination. Simon Marmion's soft, atmospheric light belonged to a world of Christian devotion, but a different kind of radiance, sharp and jewel-like, was being perfected at the very same time in a distant Eastern Empire. In the glittering capital of Herat, in the heart of the Timurid realm, an anonymous Persian master was creating a new visual epic. We know them only as the master of the Hatem Shahnameh, named for the breathtaking manuscript they helped create, a copy of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, the Persian Book of Kings. This was not a private prayer book, but a national saga, a poetic history of mythical heroes and ancient rulers that defined Persian identity. Commissioned by the cultured Prince Baysunghur, a grandson of the conqueror Tamerlane, this book was a statement of imperial power and refined taste. To open its pages is to step into a universe of orchestrated brilliance. The colors are not soft or atmospheric, but intense and clear like stained glass, lapis lazuli blues, emerald greens, and fiery vermilion red. The compositions are dynamic and crowded, filled with a rhythmic energy that pulls your eye across the page. In a scene of a legendary battle, you see not a chaotic melee, but a patterned dance of warriors, their curved blades forming elegant arcs against a field of detailed armor and swirling banners. Every inch of the page is alive with intricate pattern, from the geometric designs on a tent to the delicate flowers scattered across a meadow. This is a world where decoration and narrative are fused into one inseparable whole. The mystery of this master is deeply tied to the most famous name in Persian painting, Kamal ud-Din Behzad. Behzad, who would later lead the royal workshop, was a young artist in Herat during the creation of the Hatem Shahnameh. The stylistic fingerprints are compelling, the attention to individual emotion in a crowded scene, the masterful balance of complex groups, and the exquisite rendering of textiles and nature all point to the revolutionary style Behzad would come to embody. So, was our anonymous master Behzad's own teacher, the one who trained the young genius in these very techniques? Or was this master a brilliant peer within the same royal atelier, working under the prince's direct supervision to set a new standard for the epic? The truth is likely woven into the collaborative nature of the Timurid workshop itself. A project this monumental required specialists, a master of composition, a virtuoso of portraiture, a genius of floral borders. Our master may have been the lead designer, the one who established the vibrant, rhythmic vision that made this Shahnameh a landmark, but the artistry reveals another, broader fusion. Look closely at the rocky outcrops in a landscape, or the sinuous, coiling bodies of dragons. These forms show a clear debt to Chinese art, a result of the Timurid Empire's position on the Silk Road. Through trade and diplomacy, Chinese scrolls and ceramics made their way to Herat, and Persian artists eagerly absorbed these motifs, translating the ink-wash mountains of the East into their own language of precise line and flat, brilliant color. The master of the Hauten Shahnameh did not copy, they synthesized, creating a uniquely Persian visual language that could contain both an epic battle and a single, perfect blossom. This manuscript stands as a testament to a workshop operating at the peak of its powers, blending traditions to create something entirely new for a prince who wanted his court to be the center of the world's beauty. And as this Persian style reached its zenith, a very different artistic discipline was being used to tell sacred stories far to the west, not with a brush, but with a needle, weaving light into the very fabric of a cathedral. The luminous poetry of Simon Marmion and the jeweled epics of Persia represent two pinnacles of the illuminated book, but the true engine of this art in its final century was a school, not a single master. In the thriving cities of Ghent and Bruges, a collaborative artistic movement flourished, producing manuscripts of such consistent brilliance that we group them under one name, the Ghent-Bruges School. Within this hive of genius, one artist stands out for their vibrant, bustling vision, the master of the Ghent Breviary. This master was almost certainly trained in the orbit of the greatest atelier of all, the workshop of the Master of Mary of Burgundy. You can see the family resemblance in the exquisite detail, the love for textures, and the solid, dignified figures. But where the Master of Mary of Burgundy specialized in profound intimacy and illusion, this artist had a different, equally captivating gift, a genius for crowded, kinetic storytelling. Their style is one of organized chaos, where borders are not mere decoration, but overflow with continuous narrative. Instead of static vines or heraldic shields, the margins of a page might depict the entire story of the prodigal son, from his departure to his celebration, unfolding in a lively frieze of tiny, animated figures. This transformed the act of reading into a dynamic experience, where the eye could travel from the central sacred text out into these bustling, parallel worlds of human drama. This very skill, however, places the master at the heart of a modern scholarly puzzle. In a school defined by collaboration and shared styles, what was their specific role? Were they a specialist brought in specifically to paint these intricate narrative borders, a sort of master of marginalia, or did they run their own satellite workshop, producing complete books that carried the prestigious Ghent-Bruges signature, but with their own distinctive narrative flair? The evidence is painted in their namesake work, the monumental Ghent Breviary. This book, a collection of daily prayers and readings for the clergy, is a masterpiece of observation. Its calendar pages are particularly revealing. For the month of July, you don't see a generic noble hunting scene. Instead, you see peasants shearing sheep in a sun-drenched field, the animals held firmly, the shearers bent in postures of real labor. For September, farmers are shown harvesting grapes, their baskets heavy with fruit, the vines a tangled, organic mass. These are not idealized symbols, but snapshots of the seasonal rhythm of Flanders itself, a deep connection to the land and its people. But the master's technical innovation is just as striking. Look at the way they paint the interior of a church or a castle hall. Earlier illuminators often hinted at depth. This master mastered it through the dramatic use of cast shadow. A figure standing in a doorway doesn't just overlap the frame, they cast a soft, definitive shadow onto the floor tiles, anchoring them firmly in a real, three-dimensional space. This subtle play of light and dark, a technique absorbed from the great panel painters of the day, gave their crowded scenes a new coherence and weight. The world in their pages feels inhabitable, busy, and alive, a sacred text surrounded by the vibrant hum of the everyday. The master of the Ghent Breviary, then, represents a vital strand in the final, glorious tapestry of manuscript art, an artist who took the lofty refinements of the court and grounded them in the fertile soil of daily life, proving that devotion could be found not only in a solitary vision, but in the shared, bustling story of a community at work and prayer. The bustling, earthy world of the Ghent Breviary stands in stark contrast to another late masterpiece, a book of such immense scale and ambition it was less a manuscript and more a portable museum. The Grimani Breviary, created in the early 1500s, is a behemoth of vellum and paint, a final, feverish dream of the Gothic style. It was commissioned for Venice's most powerful cardinal, but its pages were painted by a small army of artists from the north, each bringing their own distinct voice to the chorus. Among them, one anonymous master was entrusted with the foundational narrative, the life of King David. This artist, known only as the master of the David scenes, did not paint in the soft, atmospheric style of their contemporaries. Instead, they looked forward, or perhaps sideways, to a new and unsettling elegance. Their David is not a simple shepherd or a pious king. He is a mannerist figure decades before the term existed. Look at his form, elongated and sinuous, caught in poses of exaggerated drama. When he plays the harp for Saul, his body curves into an impossible serpentine twist, fingers splayed across the strings with theatrical intensity. The colors are no less startling, shifting from the deep jewel tones of tradition to acidic greens, sharp yellows, and unexpected lavender hues that feel both brilliant and slightly dissonant. This is not an attempt at naturalism, but at emotional amplification, using form and color to heighten the psychological tension of the biblical story. This radical style immediately presents a geographic mystery. Where did this artist come from? The elongated figures and complex poses show a clear knowledge of the emerging Antwerp Mannerist style flourishing in the Netherlands, a style that itself was reacting to Italian Renaissance ideas filtering north. Yet, the particular palette and the treatment of drapery, with its sharp, crystalline folds, also bear a striking resemblance to works from the French court at Rouen. Was this master a Flemish artist who had traveled through France, absorbing influences along the way, or were they a French painter deeply aware of the avant-garde experiments happening in Antwerp? The Grimani Breviary itself offers a clue. It was a pan-European project. Venetian wealth purchased the labor of the finest northern workshops, assembling their contributions into a single, overwhelming volume. The master of the David scenes likely worked in a specialized atelier, perhaps in Ghent or Bruges, that received a specific commission for these miniatures. Their panels were then sent south, to be bound alongside calendar pages by the master of the Ghent Breviary and other luminaries. This artist's contribution is a perfect snapshot of a moment in flux, their work a bridge between the collapsing Gothic world and the rising, anxious energy of Mannerism. They operated within a vast, impersonal system of artistic production, yet they stamped their pages with a style so personal and prescient that it still vibrates with strange life centuries later, a final, brilliant mutation in the illuminated book's long evolution. That final, brilliant mutation was made possible by a workshop system operating at industrial scale. In the closing years of the 15th century, the city of Bruges perfected a new kind of artistic export, a luxury good produced with such consistent excellence that its creator's name was irrelevant. We know this artist only as the master of the prayer books of around 1500, a title that speaks volumes about their anonymity and their staggering output. Their workshop was a factory for devotion, mass-producing books of hours of breathtaking quality for a burgeoning international market. If you were a wealthy merchant in Spain, a noble in Germany, or a cleric in England, ordering a prayer book from Bruges, there was a high chance the delicate pages that arrived would bear this master's unmistakable signature style. It is a style of serene opulence. The miniatures themselves are beautifully painted, often depicting standard scenes like the Annunciation or the Crucifixion with a soft, dignified clarity. But the true magic happens in the borders. Forget the busy narrative margins of the Ghent Breviary. Here, the borders are wide, calm fields of deep, tooled gold. This isn't flat gold leaf, but gold that has been meticulously patterned with tiny punches, creating a textured, shimmering ground that catches the light like brocade. And upon this radiant surface, the master's artists painted with a naturalist's eye. Delicate strawberries, violets, and columbines seem to grow directly from the page. A jeweled pendant or a rosary of coral beads is cast casually upon the gold. Its shadow painted with such care it looks ready to be picked up. Most charmingly, realistic insects, a bright ladybug, a delicate butterfly alight among the flowers, a tiny celebration of the created world nestled beside the sacred text. This combination of lavish gold and observed nature was a guaranteed recipe for beauty. a product designed to satisfy a universal craving for both splendor and a touch of the familiar. Which raises the compelling mystery at the heart of this operation. With an output numbering in the hundreds, perhaps even thousands of books, why does this master remain a complete cipher? We have no name, no court record, not even a hint of a personality. The answer lies in the very perfection of their system. This was not the workshop of a solitary genius, but a flawlessly branded atelier. The master of the prayer books of around 1500 was likely the owner and creative director, the person who established the exquisite template, sourced the finest materials, and managed a team of specialized painters. One artist might paint only flowers, another only faces, another only the tooling on the gold. The system was so efficient, the model so refined, that the workshop could produce these luxurious objects with remarkable speed and consistency. The brand was the style itself, a recognizable mark of quality that guaranteed value to a distant buyer who would never meet the artist. Their anonymity, then, is not a historical accident, but the ultimate sign of commercial success. In a world increasingly connected by trade, they perfected a beautiful product that could be ordered from a catalog, a final, poignant chapter in the story of the medieval illuminator, where art became both a spiritual object and a commodity of the highest order. Gold leaf and Flemish flowers traveled further north than we might expect, all the way to the windswept court of a Scottish king. In the first years of the 1500s, an illuminator of immense skill created a prayer book for one of Europe's most intriguing royal couples, James IV of Scotland and his young English bride, Margaret Tudor. We know this artist only as the master of James IV of Scotland, a name that ties them forever to a political union fraught with hope and future conflict. The book they made, The Hours of James IV, is a stunning artifact of diplomatic art, a portable piece of propaganda meant to cement a fragile peace between two ancient enemies. Stylistically, the master's hand is unmistakably Flemish. Trained in the vibrant, detailed tradition of the Ghent Bruges school, the pages shimmer with the familiar lush borders, where jewel-like flowers and insects are scattered across ground in tooled gold. The figures within the miniatures are solid and expressive, their drapery falling in heavy, realistic folds that speak of a deep familiarity with the panel painting techniques of the Netherlands. Yet, woven into this Flemish tapestry are threads of a distinctly local identity. The borders are punctuated by the heraldic symbols of the United Kingdoms, the Scottish thistle, and the English rose growing side by side from the same stem. The royal monograms, I and M for James and Margaret, are elegantly intertwined throughout. This was not just a beautiful prayer book, it was a dynastic seal, a visual promise of the Tudor-Stuart lineage that would one day unite the crowns. The mystery of this master is not one of style, but of geography. Did this Flemish artist ever set foot in Scotland? The question is central to understanding the manuscript's creation. One theory suggests the book was commissioned remotely. James and Margaret, aware of the supreme quality of Netherlandish workshops, could have sent specifications and heraldic details to a leading atelier in Bruges or Ghent, where the master executed the work entirely abroad before shipping the finished treasure north. This was common practice for royalty seeking the best craftsmanship. However, another compelling possibility exists. The portraits within the book are remarkably specific and intimate. James is shown at prayer, his features recognizable from other contemporary likenesses. Margaret appears, a young queen in richly detailed English-style gowns. There is a famous, charming miniature of the king observing a scene of the presentation in the temple, as if he is a devout witness within his own book. This level of personalized detail suggests the artist may have had direct access to the royal couple, perhaps even traveling to the Scottish court to sketch their features and the details of their attire and court life. If true, it means this Flemish master brought the full brilliance of continental illumination into the heart of Edinburgh, a cultural emissary painting a new future for a kingdom on the edge of Europe. Regardless where the brush met the vellum, the political significance of the Hours of James IV is profound. Margaret Tudor was the sister of Henry VIII of England. Her marriage to James was the Treaty of Perpetual Peace made flesh, an attempt to end centuries of warfare. This book, used in her private devotions, was a constant physical reminder of that union and her dual role as both an English princess and a Scottish queen. Every time she opened it, she saw the joined thistle and rose, her husband's portrait, and the artistic splendor that symbolized their elevated European stature. In the master's skilled hands, a personal object of faith became a cornerstone of statecraft, its silent pages speaking volumes about ambition, alliance, and the fragile art of peace. That Scottish royal prayer book was a masterpiece of diplomacy, but its Flemish style points to a deeper, more personal revolution happening in the workshops back home. A revolution that may have been led by the most famous painter of them all. Among the countless anonymous masters, one name stands above all others in the history of Northern European art, Jan van Eyck. His oil paintings, like the Ghent altarpiece, are celebrated for their godlike precision and luminous realism. But what if his journey to that summit began not on a wooden panel, but on the fragile page of a prayer book? This brings us to one of the most tantalizing mysteries in art history, and to an illuminator known as the master of the Dresden altarpiece. This shadowy figure is credited with painting a series of miniatures in a fragmented and tragic manuscript called the Turin-Milan Hours. And these miniatures are unlike anything that came before. They do not look like illuminations. They look like tiny, portable Van Eycks. The naturalism is shocking. In a scene of the birth of John the Baptist, the light doesn't just illuminate. It seems to seep into the room, falling through a real window to cast soft, believable shadows on the tiled floor and the figures' faces. The fabrics, a velvet gown, a woolen blanket, are rendered with a tactile truth you can almost feel. Most astonishing are the landscapes glimpsed through doorways and windows. They are not decorative backdrops, but vast, airy vistas of rivers winding toward distant, hazy mountains under a sky full of atmosphere. This is the world seen with new eyes. The technique behind this miracle is the real clue. The master didn't use the traditional tempera paints common in manuscripts. He used oils, the slow-drying, blendable medium of panel painters. This allowed for those seamless gradations of light, those jewel-like depths of color, and those effects of glowing luminosity that would become Van Eyck's signature. To paint like this on parchment, a surface very different from a prepared wooden panel, required a radical technical innovation. It suggests an artist who was fundamentally a painter first, experimenting on a miniature scale. So, the great burning question is this: was the master of the Dresden altarpiece actually the young Jan van Eyck? The stylistic evidence is powerfully compelling. The obsessive attention to detail, the scientific observation of light, the treatment of drapery, and the revolutionary approach to landscape are all hallmarks of Van Eyck's mature work. Scholars who support this theory propose that these miniatures represent Van Eyck's early apprenticeship, perhaps when he was employed as a court artist in The Hague for a powerful prince before he rose to fame in Bruges. They are his laboratory where he perfected the oil techniques that would change art forever. The mystery, however, is tragically entangled with fire. The key evidence, the most exquisite miniatures from the Turin-Milan Hours, were housed in the Turin State Library. In January of 1904, a devastating fire swept through the library. While some pages were saved, many of these very miniatures were severely damaged or reduced to ashes. The most direct physical evidence for this theory was literally burned away, leaving art historians to rely on pre-fire photographs and the few surviving fragments. This loss casts a permanent shadow of doubt. Opponents of the Van Eyck theory argue that the master could have been a brilliant follower, someone working in his immediate circle who had fully absorbed the new style. Perhaps it was his older brother Hubert, or another gifted painter in the Burgundian court's employ. The truth may be forever obscured by that smoke. Yet, the possibility remains electrifying, that we might hold in our hands, in the form of a prayer book, the youthful experiments of a man who taught the world to see in oil. It suggests that the greatest artistic revolution of the North didn't begin on the public altar, but in the private, sacred space of a book, where a painter learned to make light itself obey his brush. The possibility of Jan van Eyck's hand in a prayer book is a profound thought, but for another emperor, there was no mystery about the propaganda value of a manuscript. For Maximilian I, the ambitious Holy Roman Emperor, a book was not merely a personal devotional object, it was a portable monument to his dynasty. And the artist tasked with building that monument is known to us as the master of the older prayer book of Maximilian I. This lavish manuscript, created around 1510, is less a collection of prayers and more a visual coronation ceremony bound in leather. Every page serves the cult of the emperor. You open it to find not just the Virgin Mary, but a full-page portrait of Maximilian himself, kneeling in devout profile, his sharp, intelligent face rendered with the scrutiny of a court painter. He is surrounded by a halo of his own heraldry, the double-headed eagle of the empire, the coats of arms of his vast territories, and the intricate knots and devices that were his personal emblems. Even the borders are arsenals of symbolism, filled with armor, artillery, and imperial banners, as if the very frame of his prayer was fortified by military might. This was piety as political performance, a declaration that the emperor's soul and his sovereign power were one and the same. The master illuminator behind this work was a consummate court artist, a visual spin doctor of the highest order. Their style is a fascinating hybrid, a perfect reflection of Maximilian's own position straddling two eras. The overall structure feels late Gothic, with its ornate tooled gold borders and a certain formal elegance in the figure compositions. Yet, look closer at that portrait of the emperor. The attention to his individual likeness, the careful modeling of his cheekbones, and the shrewd expression in his eyes. This is the emerging spirit of the Northern Renaissance, an interest in the real, specific person. Similarly, the architectural settings in some miniatures begin to show a grasp of perspective that feels more modern, more influenced by Italian ideas filtering north. This blend was no accident. Maximilian was a voracious patron who employed a small army of artists, including the famed Albrecht Dürer, to craft his legacy through prints, sculptures, and book. So where does our anonymous master fit into this vast workshop? The central mystery is one of proximity and rank. Were they a senior illuminator within the emperor's direct employ in Innsbruck or Vienna, perhaps overseeing a dedicated manuscript studio, or were they the head of a prestigious commercial workshop in a center like Augsburg or Regensburg, commissioned for this specific, high-profile job because their style matched the imperial taste? The connection to Dürer is particularly tantalizing. Some scholars see in the master's more advanced figure drawings and portraiture a possible influence from, or even collaboration with, Dürer's design. It is possible that the master had access to Dürer's prints or workshop models, integrating that cutting-edge Renaissance draftsmanship into the traditional format of the illuminated prayer book. This would make them a crucial bridge figure, translating the new artistic language of the era into the rarefied, conservative world of imperial patronage. Their ultimate anonymity, then, might be by design. In Maximilian's grand program, the individual artist was a craftsman in service to the Habsburg myth. The master's name was less important than their ability to manifest the emperor's will in gold and color, to make a private book of hours feel like the foundation charter of an eternal empire. And as this tradition of imperial glorification reached its peak, a quieter, more introspective art was being born from a very different kind of devotion, one that sought not to build a dynasty, but to dismantle the self in radiant geometry. That imperial propaganda was painted for a world of fixed hierarchies, but another German artist was capturing the court from the inside with a wink and a whisper. In the late 1500s, an enigmatic figure known as the Master of the Amsterdam Cabinet, or more commonly, the Housebook Master, created a body of work that feels startlingly modern. He is famed for his exquisite dry-point engravings, a technique where lines are scratched directly into a metal plate, producing soft, velvety shadows. These prints offer an unparalleled glimpse into late medieval life, from noble jousts to peasant weddings, all observed with a wry, humane eye, but his hand may also have touched the world of illumination, most compellingly in a peculiar and delightful manuscript called the Book of the Tournament. This is not a sacred text, but a playful, detailed manual on the rules and pageantry of jousting, a medieval fantasy written for entertainment. The illustrations within it are a world apart from the solemn gold of a prayer book. The style is lively, informal, and bursting with observation. Knights are shown not only in the glorious charge, but also in the undignified moments, struggling into their armor or being unhorsed into the mud. The scenes are framed by quick, sketchy penwork, with washes of soft color that feel spontaneous, almost like a visual diary of courtly fun. The figures are not idealized icons, but individuals, their faces often caught in expressions of concentration, surprise, or good-natured rivalry. It is a behind-the-scenes tour of chivalry, drawn by someone who clearly knew the spectacle intimately, both its grandeur and its absurdity. This attribution, however, opens a classic mystery. Is the housebookmaster a single, supremely gifted artist? Or is it the name we give to a small, sophisticated workshop operating under a unified style? The dry-point engravings and the manuscript illustrations share an undeniable kinship, a common way of depicting movement and a shared fascination with the textures of everyday life, from the sheen of polished armor to the rough wool of a spectator's cloak. Yet, some scholars see subtle variations in draftsmanship that could suggest multiple hands working in close collaboration, perhaps a master designer providing the drawings and assistants executing the penwork and color. The core question is how his graphic style, so dependent on the expressive freedom of the engraved line, translates to the more constrained, decorative world of illumination. The answer lies in the very informality of the Book of the Tournament. This manuscript was likely a personal commission, not a public liturgical work. Without the pressure to create a timeless object of gold and lapis, the artist was free to apply the same observational principles he used in his print. The illumination becomes an extension of his graphic art, using the parchment page as another surface for his keen narrative eye. He traded the monumental for the momentary, capturing the flicker of a banner in the wind or the casual slouch of a squire, and in doing so, he gives one of the most human and immediate portraits of the medieval knight ever made, not as a saint in armor, but as a man at play. While the housebookmaster captured knights at play, an earlier and far more solemn kind of illumination was being perfected within the quiet walls of a northern German monastery. In the early 1300s, in the bustling port city of Lübeck, a Benedictine monk took up his brush to work on a project of staggering scale, the giant Lübeck Bible. This is the world of the master of the Lübeck Bible, an artist whose name is lost, but whose vision anchors us in the powerful, symbolic art of the Romanesque era, a full 2 centuries before the delicate naturalism of the Ghent Bruges school. To open this Bible is to step into a different universe of belief. Forget atmospheric landscapes and intimate portraits. Here, the figures are monumental, carved from color rather than modeled with light. They stand or sit with a hieratic, imposing stillness, their large, expressive eyes fixed in a timeless gaze that seems to look right through the viewer into the divine. The space they inhabit is not a room or a field, but an abstract ground of brilliant, solid color, often a radiant gold or a deep lapis blue. This is art that speaks not to our sense of reality, but directly to our spirit, using form and color as a symbolic language. A scene of the crucifixion is not a historical moment filled with grief. It is a theological statement. Christ on the cross is a serene, triumphant figure, larger than the mourning Mary and John who flank him, his body forming a perfect, enduring icon against the golden heaven. Every element is charged with meaning, from the stylized folds of the robes to the symbolic gestures of the hands. This was the visual theology of the Romanesque period, meant to inspire awe and contemplation in a communal setting, likely within the cathedral scriptorium itself. The mystery of this master is inseparable from his identity as a monk. Unlike the commercial workshops of Bruges, this was sacred work performed within the cloister, part of the monastic duty of ora et labora, prayer and work. The scriptorium at Lübeck Cathedral was likely a hive of disciplined activity, with scribes copying the sacred text onto enormous parchment sheets, and illuminators like our master bringing the word to life in color and gold. His anonymity was not a commercial choice, but a vow of humility. His art was an offering to God, not a path to personal fame. This context makes the Lübeck Bible a fascinating puzzle. The style is consistent enough to suggest a single guiding artistic mind, the master who designed the most important full-page miniatures. But such a massive project would have required assistance from other brothers in the scriptorium. Did the master paint the key faces and hands, while others filled in the backgrounds and decorative initials under his watchful eye? Was he also the scribe, or did he work in close harmony with the brother who penned the majestic text? The silence of the monastic record leaves these questions open, allowing us to imagine a collaborative act of devotion where individual hands merge into a single purpose. Placing the Lübeck Bible alongside a later Gothic masterpiece, like a page from the Tres Riches Heuris, reveals the breathtaking evolution of illumination. The Romanesque master sought to represent eternal truths through symbol and power. The Limbourg Brothers, 3 centuries later, sought to capture the fleeting beauty of the temporal world through observation and light. One is a meditation on the divine order, the other a celebration of God's creation. The master of the Lübeck Bible reminds us that before illuminators became storytellers of human emotion, they were architects of sacred vision, building portals to heaven with the sheer force of color and form. And as the Gothic style began to soften those monumental forms, another artist in a different monastic tradition would use that new language to create a private universe of such intricate beauty that it feels like a secret whispered on parchment. Gold was the language of power in the scriptorium at Echternach. In the middle of the 11th century, under the patronage of the Holy Roman Emperor Henry III, a master illuminator in his workshop created a book so lavish it seemed to be forged from sunlight itself, the Codex Aureus, the Golden Book of Echternach. This is not the intimate, emotional art of later centuries, but a monumental declaration of divine and imperial authority, painted in the heart of Europe's Ottoman Renaissance. To open its pages is to be confronted by a wall of shimmering gold. Entire backgrounds are not painted, but plated, covered in sheets of burnished gold leaf so thick and perfect it feels like a solid heavenly substance. Upon this radiant ground, the master painted his iconic figures: Christ in majesty, the Virgin Mary, the evangelists. They are not gentle or approachable. They are hieratic presences with large solemn eyes and rigid frontal poses, their robes falling in heavy schematic folds that echo the carved ivory panels of the era. They are less individuals than eternal ideas, made visible through a filter of awesome, untouchable splendor, but look closer at the borders and the intricate lettering. Here, the master's genius reveals a deeper, more complex story. Woven around the golden pages are wild, vibrant patterns of interlacing vines and knotwork. These are not the delicate acanthus leaves of later Gothic art. These are energetic, almost chaotic tangles of line, where plant forms twist into animal heads and serpentine bodies. This is the unmistakable influence of the North, a direct visual conversation with the Viking and Celtic metalwork and stone carving that flourished beyond the empire's borders. It is a stunning synthesis, the imperial Roman gold and solemn Christian iconography, now framed by the dynamic, pagan-inflected artistry of the Germanic world. The Codex Aureus is a political document in paint and gold. Its creation was almost certainly tied directly to the imperial workshop of Emperor Henry III, one of the most powerful rulers of the medieval world, who sought to unify his realm under the twin banners of the Church and the Crown. A book of such staggering expense and theological weight was a tool of statecraft, a gift to a major abbey like Echternach to secure its loyalty and display the emperor's role as God's chosen ruler on earth. This brings us to the central mystery of the master and his atelier. Who were these artists working with such unified vision? The Reichenau School, a group of monasteries around Lake Constance, was famed for its illumination, but Echternach was another major center. Did a single, visionary master travel between these scriptoria, bringing the imperial style with him? Or was the Codex Aureus the product of a dedicated workshop assembled specifically for the emperor, staffed by the finest talents from across the realm, each contributing their regional influences? The fusion of classical Roman form, Byzantine gold, and northern interlace suggests a collaborative melting pot, all directed toward a single glorious purpose. This golden age of Ottoman illumination served a crucial historical role. It acted as a lifeboat for classical knowledge and artistic forms. In the chaotic centuries after the fall of Rome, monasteries like Echternach became fortresses of memory. The masters there, through their copying of ancient texts and their adherence to a formal, monumental style, preserved the visual language of the late classical world, the sense of order, balance, and grandeur. They froze that language in gold, keeping it safe through the early Middle Ages so that centuries later, artists of the Renaissance could rediscover it and believe they were reviving something entirely new. The master of the Codex Aureus did not paint a world observed. He built a vision of eternal, imperial heaven, a fortress of faith where every gleam of gold was a prayer and a proclamation of power. And as this golden age faded, the focus of illumination would shift dramatically from the imperial court to the private citizen, and from the fortress of gold to the intimate, colorful world of the everyday merchant. The golden fortress of the Codex Aureus was built for an emperor, but centuries later, the very idea of the medieval masterpiece would be skillfully counterfeited for a new kind of collector. In the early 1900s, museums and wealthy buyers were thrilled to discover a forgotten genius, a 15th century Spanish master whose charming panels and illuminated leaves began appearing on the market. His style was delightfully Gothic, filled with slender, graceful figures in rich robes, set against tooled gold backgrounds dotted with delicate flowers. The works had a convincing warmth and a pleasing, slightly faded authenticity. Art historians dubbed this prolific new discovery the Spanish forger, and for decades, his medieval creations were celebrated and acquired by major institutions. There was just one extraordinary problem. The Spanish forger was not medieval at all. He was a brilliant, anonymous artist working in Paris in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, crafting these pieces specifically to feed a booming market hungry for the romance of the Gothic past. His real genius lay in a seductive blend of the authentic and the anachronistic. He studied real manuscripts and panel paintings, mastering the look of gold leaf, the crackle of old varnish, and the general composition of a devotional scene. But then, he filtered it all through a distinctly modern sensibility. His figures often have a sentimental, storybook sweetness that feels more like Victorian illustration than the solemn piety of the 15th century. The colors, while rich, sometimes lack the mineral depth of true medieval pigments. Most tellingly, his subjects often included charming, genre-like scenes of courtly life that appealed directly to the romantic tastes of his contemporary buyers, scenes that a true medieval patron might have found frivolous for a sacred work. The mystery of his true identity became a tantalizing art world puzzle. For over half a century, the forger operated in the shadows, his deception so successful it reshaped the understanding of Spanish Gothic art. The breakthrough came through meticulous detective work, a combination of scientific analysis and stylistic forensics. Experts began to notice that the chemical composition of his paints and the preparation of old wooden panels used materials common in the 19th century, not the 15th. The final revelation arrived in the 1960s, when scholar Jean-Paul Coremans, through exhaustive research, unmasked the forger as a Parisian painter and restorer named Paul B. Coremans, this namesake revelation closed the case on one of the most successful and artistically gifted forgery operations in history. The enduring fascination with the Spanish forger is not about the crime, but about the mirror he holds up to his own era. His works were so convincing because they perfectly reflected what early 20th century collectors wanted the Middle Ages to be, not what they actually were. They desired a past that was decorative, noble, and pleasantly sentimental, a refined escape from their own industrial age. The forger, with a shrewd understanding of his market, gave them exactly that, a Gothic dream painted with modern brushes. His legacy is a permanent, charming cautionary tale, reminding us that every generation rediscovers the past through the lens of its own desires, and sometimes a clever artist is there to paint that desire into being. The Spanish forger's dream of the past was a modern fantasy, but a century earlier, a very real artist was helping to invent the future of the book. In the sun-drenched workshops of Florence and Ferrara around 1450, an illuminator known as the Master of the Geneva Boccaccio was not painting saints or psalms. His pages were filled with lovers, tricksters, and storytellers, illustrating the witty, worldly tales of Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron. This was a revolution in subject matter, a decisive turn from the devotional to the humanist. The medieval prayer book, with its focus on the soul's journey to God, was now sharing shelf space with secular manuscripts that celebrated the human journey through life, with all its romance, folly, and earthly wisdom. The master's style is a perfect reflection of this new age. His figures are not the stiff, symbolic forms of Gothic art, but graceful, animated beings who move with a classical poise. They converse in loggias adorned with perfectly proportioned columns and rounded arches, their settings drawn from the rediscovered architecture of ancient Rome. The landscapes behind them are orderly and serene, bathed in a clear, rational light that defines every form. This is the early Italian Renaissance aesthetic, captured on vellum with a jeweler's precision. The color palette is bright and airy, favoring soft pinks, pale blues, and earthy greens, a world away from the deep, jewel-toned solemnity of a Burgundian Book of Hours. In one typical miniature, you might see a scene from the Decameron where a group of elegant young nobles, fleeing the plague in Florence, gather in a villa garden to tell their tales. The composition is balanced, the perspective carefully constructed to draw the eye into the scene. The figures' faces are individualized and expressive, their gestures natural and conversational. It feels less like a sacred illustration and more like a window into a sophisticated literary salon, a celebration of civility, storytelling, and the revival of classical ideals. This shift was driven by a new class of patron, wealthy merchants, bankers, and princes who were passionate collectors of classical literature and philosophy. Owning a lavishly illustrated copy of Boccaccio or Virgil was a mark of immense cultural sophistication, a way to align oneself with the learning of the ancients and the cutting-edge artistry of the modern age. The book itself transformed from a tool for prayer into a treasure of personal erudition and entertainment. Yet for all the clarity of his style, the master's own identity is shrouded in a tantalizing mist. The enduring mystery asks, who is this artist moving in the highest circles of Renaissance humanism? The stylistic clues point toward the most celebrated workshops of the time. The delicate modeling of faces, the serene expressions, and the treatment of drapery bear a striking resemblance to the frescoes of Fra Angelico, the devout Dominican friar whose art embodied a heavenly grace. Could our master have trained in Fra Angelico's bottega, learning to paint divine beauty before applying it to secular stories? Or perhaps the connection runs through Fra Angelico's most famous pupil, Benazzo Gozzoli, whose own frescoes are famed for their gorgeous, courtly pageantry and detailed landscapes qualities that align perfectly with the Geneva Boccaccio miniature. It is possible the master was a specialist illuminator within Gozzoli's circle, tasked with translating the painter's monumental style to the intimate scale of the manuscript. Another theory places him in the cultured court of Ferrara, working for the S family, great patrons who blended Northern Gothic influences with the new Renaissance style. Wherever he worked, the master of the Geneva Boccaccio stands at a definitive crossroads. His art signals the moment the illuminated manuscript fully embraced the Renaissance project, turning its gaze from the gold-crowned heavens to the harmonious, human-scaled world being rebuilt on earth. In his elegant pages, the story is no longer about salvation, but about society itself, a worldly drama framed by the perfect geometry of a new age. Those elegant literary scenes open a door to a new kind of curiosity, one that looked beyond human stories to the wonders of the natural world itself. In the same vibrant Italian circles, another master turned their brush from the comedies of Boccaccio to the encyclopedic knowledge of the ancients. Known only as the master of the London Pliny, this artist specialized in a genre that fueled the Renaissance mind, the illuminated scientific text. Their masterpiece was a magnificent copy of Pliny the Elder's Natural History, a first-century Roman encyclopedia that cataloged everything from astronomy to zoology. For a 15th century scholar, this book was a thrilling rediscovery, a direct line to the lost knowledge of the classical world. The Illuminators' task was monumental, to give visual form to Pliny's descriptions, transforming words on parchment into a vivid catalog of creation. The pages burst with life. A leopard, spotted and sinuous, pads through a margin. A unicorn, pure white and noble, rears beside a stream, its existence taken as fact from the ancient text. Trees bear fruits rendered with botanical precision, and herbs are painted with enough detail that a physician might almost recognize them. Yet, this is where the mystery of observation begins. The artist worked from a blend of sources, some real, some legendary. They had likely seen a leopard, perhaps in a noble's menagerie, but the unicorn was a creature of description and belief, painted from a blend of horse, goat, and sheer imagination. Their art occupied a fascinating middle ground, striving for realism while faithfully illustrating a text that itself mixed fact and fable. This illuminator was not just a decorator, but a partner in the scientific revival. Who commissioned such a specialized work? The patronage points to a new elite, not just princes of the church or state, but learned nobles and humanist scholars who were building private libraries as cabinets of curiosity. A man like Cardinal Giovanni of Aragon, a famed bibliophile with a passion for classical science, would have been a perfect patron. Owning a lavishly illustrated Pliny was a mark of profound intellectual prestige, a way to possess and visually master the ancient world's understanding of nature. The master's style reveals their own classical education. The animals are often posed against simple, blank backgrounds, or within framed landscapes that echo Roman relief sculpture. The figures of scholars or mythic creatures within the initials have a solid, statuesque quality drawn from newly studied antique models. This was a conscious aesthetic choice, using a revived classical form to illustrate classical content, making the book itself a unified artifact of the Renaissance ideal. In this, the master of the London Pliny performed a quiet, essential service. Before the age of printed field guides or botanical illustrations, their illuminated pages were the primary visual reference for the natural world as the ancients knew it. They helped bridge a 1,000-year gap, making Pliny's words tangible and sparking the curiosity that would soon lead to direct, empirical observation. The unicorn on the page would eventually be questioned, but the leopard's accurate form, captured from life, pointed the way forward. In their studio, the boundary between medieval bestiary and modern zoology was still blurred, but the light of close looking was unmistakably dawning. That curiosity about the natural world was matched by an intense fascination with the recent past, with the grand and bloody spectacle of history itself. In the thriving port of Bruges around 1470, an illuminator of remarkable narrative skill turned their attention from saints and psalms to the clash of armies and the intrigue of court. Known only as the master of the Harley Froissart, this artist found their calling in illustrating one of the most popular histories of the age, Jean Froissart's Chronicles, a sprawling account of the first half of the 100 Years' War. For a patron, owning a copy of Froissart was not about ancient Rome. It was about understanding the very conflicts that shaped their own world, the rivalries between England and France, the rise and fall of chivalric heroes. And in the hands of this master, history leaped from the page with the reporter's urgency. Their miniatures are not static portraits, they are dynamic sequences bursting with life. A battle scene is a masterclass in organized chaos. You can see the individual strain on a knight's face as he raises his sword, the specific design of the banner snapping in the wind, and the chaotic press of horses and men in the melee. In a scene of a royal ceremony, every courtier's expression and sumptuous garment is rendered with care, capturing the politics of the gaze, who is looking at whom, who hold the center of power. The artist had a particular genius for architecture, depicting castles and walled cities with a convincing sense of mass and siegecraft, showing exactly where ladders were placed and where the walls were weakest. This was history as a gripping visual drama, designed to make the reader feel like an eyewitness to the glorious and terrible events that define the age of chivalry. But this very focus creates the central mystery surrounding the master's workshop. Who were these lavish, expensive history books actually for? The Chronicles dealt with events deeply consequential to two powerful realms, England and the Burgundian Netherlands. The illustrations show a meticulous insider's knowledge of heraldry, court dress, and military technology from both sides. So was the workshop's primary clientele the Burgundian courtiers in Bruges itself, men who saw in these pages the legacy of their own duke's political machinations. Or, given Bruges' role as a commercial hub with strong English trading ties, were these books commissioned by wealthy English merchants or nostalgic nobles across the Channel, wanting a magnificent record of their ancestors' deeds in France? The truth may be a mixture. A surviving manuscript known as the Harley-Froissart, from which the master takes their name, is written in French but contains notes and heraldry that suggest it was later owned by an English family. This points to a fascinating commercial reality. The master's workshop in Bruges likely produced these historical volumes as luxury goods for an international market, tailoring certain details to suit the buyer, whether Burgundian or English. The Illuminations, therefore, become historical documents in a double sense. They illustrate Froissart's text, but they also silently record the contemporary 15th century world of the artist. The armor, the weapons, the ship designs, and the fashions are all drawn from the master's own time, not from the earlier period of the wars. So while we see the Battle of Crécy, we are seeing it through the lens of a Bruges painter in 1470, using the latest styles of plate armor and weaponry. This makes their work an invaluable, if unintentional, archive of material culture. In the master's vibrant pages, the past is not a distant, faded tale, but a living, breathing world of color and conflict, commissioned by men who still felt its echoes in their bones and paid a fortune to hold its image in their hand. The vibrant chaos of Froissart's battlefields gives way to a different kind of order, a military precision dictated by one of history's greatest generals. In the refined libraries of early 15th century France, an illuminator of classical taste was at work, painting not the recent wars of chivalry, but the ancient, calculated campaigns of Rome. We know this artist as the master of the Copenhagen Caesar, named for their stunning illustrations in a manuscript of Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War. This book was a prized possession of the French Royal Library, a signal that the Renaissance fascination with antiquity had taken firm root in the North. The master's style is a fascinating hybrid, a bridge between two worlds, from the dominant Parisian aesthetic of the time, particularly the workshop of the Boucicaut master. They borrowed a foundation of graceful elegance. Their figures are slender and poised, their drapery falling in soft, rhythmic folds. The colors are clear and luminous, the compositions balanced with a courtly harmony. But upon this elegant Gothic framework, the master painted a world of ancient history. Their miniatures do not show knights in plate armor, but Roman legionaries in segmented lorica, centurions with transverse crests on their helmets, and Gallic chieftains in cloaks and trousers. The landscapes are not the familiar castles of France, but the fortified hilltop oppida of the Gauls and the orderly marching camps of the Roman army, rendered with a keen interest in the specifics of ancient warfare and geography. A scene of Caesar's army building a bridge across the Rhine is not just a symbolic gesture. It is a detailed diagram of engineering showing the interlocking piles and the systematic labor of the soldiers. This was illumination as historical reconstruction, an attempt to visualize the past with a new level of scholarly care. This very specificity creates the central mystery of the master's career. In a Parisian book trade dominated by workshops producing devotional books for the nobility, who was commissioning such specialized secular classical texts, and where did this illuminator fit in? The answer points directly to the highest echelons of patronage. The early 15th century saw a growing movement among French intellectuals and princes, later called the First French Renaissance, centered on the courts of King Charles V and his brothers. These men were avid collectors of ancient histories, believing that the wisdom of Rome and Greece could offer lessons in statecraft and virtue. A manuscript like the Copenhagen Caesar was the ultimate luxury object for this new humanist taste, a fusion of supreme artistry and classical learning. It was likely commissioned by a royal prince or a high-ranking courtier, with direct access to the royal library's translators and scholars. So, was the master of the Copenhagen Caesar a specialist within a larger general-purpose workshop, called upon when a classical text needed pictures? Or did they run a smaller, elite atelier that catered specifically to this learned, niche clientele? The stylistic clues suggest they were deeply immersed in the mainstream Parisian style, meaning they likely trained or worked in a major commercial shop. Their genius was in adaptation, taking the familiar visual language of the Bausicout tradition and redirecting it to serve a completely different narrative, swapping angels for aquilifers and biblical landscapes for the forests of Germania. In doing so, they performed a quiet but profound service. They helped forge a visual vocabulary for antiquity in the north, proving that the illuminated page could be a window onto the distant Roman past as easily as the heavenly Jerusalem. Their work was a precursor, a beautifully painted argument that the wisdom of the ancient world belonged, quite literally, in the hands of modern kings. Among the final, quiet masters of the Ghent Bruges school, one artist signed their work not with a name, but with a whisper. Known only as the master of the white inscriptions, this illuminator perfected a technique of breathtaking subtlety. In their serene miniatures, you will find delicate scrolls unfurling from the hands of angels, or architectural bands carved into stone altars. And upon these surfaces, the master painted lines of text so fine they seem etched by a needle, using pure white pigment to inscribe prayers, biblical verses, or identifying labels. This is not the bold gold of proclamation, but a gentle, luminous script meant to be discovered by the devout reader leaning close, turning the private act of prayer into an intimate conversation with the painted page. Their overall style mirrors this quiet intensity. The compositions are balanced and calm, the colors harmonious but restrained, favoring soft blues, muted reds, and earthy greens. The figures, often saints or the Virgin Mary, are depicted in moments of deep contemplation, their faces models of serene introspection. The emotional power lies not in dramatic gesture, but in a profound, still concentration, as if the sacred scene is holding its breath. This master did not paint for the crowded court or the bustling market, but for the solitary chamber of a truly devout soul, which brings us to the final, fitting mystery of our 30 illuminators. Was the master of the white inscriptions a lay artist running a specialized workshop, or were they a monk, perhaps a Carthusian or another contemplative order, painting these books within the silence of the cloister? The evidence is beautifully ambiguous. The extreme refinement and devotional focus of the work feel monastic, the product of an environment dedicated to prayer and meticulous craft. The white inscriptions themselves resemble the rubrics and marginal notes a monk might add to a liturgical text. Yet, the technical mastery and the clear influence of the Ghent Bruges style also suggest a professional trained in that commercial hub. Perhaps the truth is a bridge between both worlds, a lay artist who worked primarily for monastic patrons, or even a monk who had trained in a secular workshop before taking vows. Their anonymity feels complete, a final surrender of the self to the sacred purpose of the work. In a way, this master represents the last glorious sigh of the Flemish illuminated manuscript. Their career flourished right around 1500, at the very moment when the printing press, invented decades earlier, was finally achieving a dominance that would reshape knowledge forever. The press could replicate text with miraculous speed, but it could not yet replicate the luminous white script on a painted scroll or the unique devotional charge of a hand-made prayer. The master of the white inscriptions, then, stands at the sunset of an epoch. Their art is the final, perfect expression of a centuries-old tradition where every book was a unique universe, every page a handcrafted portal, and every anonymous master a guardian of light, painting not for fame, but for faith. That luminous white script fades into the parchment, a final, silent prayer. Across 5 centuries, from the golden fortresses of Ottoman emperors to the bustling workshops of Flemish merchants, these 30 masters and their nameless peers built a civilization in miniature. They were far more than decorators. They were theologians, using color and symbol to map the journey of the soul. They were storytellers, capturing the epic and the intimate with equal power. They were innovators, perfecting techniques for depicting light, space, and emotion that would echo for generations. Their legacy is a paradox written in gold leaf. We know them by nicknames borrowed from dukes, cities, or the books they left behind. Their personal identities, their faces, their voices, are almost entirely swallowed by time. Yet their art remains iconic, defining our very image of the medieval world. This anonymity is not a void, but a different kind of signature. It speaks to a culture where the work was greater than the worker, where the purpose was to illuminate a truth larger than any single self. Yet this tradition also forces us to ponder a profound and haunting loss. For every master of the Golden Scrolls or the Dresden Prayer Book who left a trace, there were countless other artists whose names vanished completely. Their brushes stirred the same paints, their hands guided the same delicate lines, but their contributions blended into the collective voice of a workshop lost to any record. And the manuscripts themselves, those fragile universes of vellum and pigment, faced unimaginable perils. Wars ravaged libraries, the Reformation condemned images as idolatry, leading to the systematic burning or defacing of countless books. Time, neglect, and the simple recycling of materials erased more than we will ever know. Each lost page represents a vision extinguished, a story untold, a unique configuration of beauty that will never be seen again. When we hold a surviving book of hours today, we are not just holding a historical artifact. We are holding a victory. It is a survivor of a silent, centuries-long catastrophe, a single vessel that sailed through storms of iconoclasm and conflict to deliver its cargo of light to our present. This connects their craft to something timeless, the fundamental human desire to create beauty and meaning, to make a mark that says, I was here, I saw this wonder, and I tried to capture it. These illuminators, named and nameless, answered that call with every stroke. They took the most precious materials of their age, gold from the earth, blue from distant mountains, and time from a human life, and they invested it all into making a single page glow. They worked knowing their names might fade, but trusting that the beauty would not. In the quiet of a library, under glass, their gamble pays off. The light they captured still shines, a testament to the enduring power of a hand, a brush, and an unwavering belief that the world and the word deserve to be clothed in radiance. Their gamble paid off in the quiet of our libraries, but their true legacy is not locked away. It lives in the vast journey we have just traced, from the anonymous monks of the Codex Aureus, who painted heaven in solid gold, to the commercial workshops of Bruges, which packaged devotion for a merchant's home. These 30 masters, and the thousands whose names are truly lost, performed an impossible alchemy. They took faith, politics, commerce, and raw human curiosity, and fused them into pages of vellum. They were bridges between worlds, channeling divine light for emperors, while also capturing the secular gleam of a lady's pearl or the mud on a farmer's boot. Their work is a visual legacy, but it is also an encrypted one. Every brushstroke, every choice of color, every whimsical margin holds a coded message about the world that made it, a world of fervent belief, brutal power, and breathtaking beauty. The mystery of their identities is not a wall, but an invitation. It asks us to look closer, to become detectives of the page, and now you can accept that invitation without stepping into a vaulted library. The digital age has performed its own miracle, placing high-resolution scans of these very manuscripts at your fingertips. Institutions like the British Library, the Morgan Library, and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France have uploaded countless treasures for the world to explore. So here is your call to action. Go online, search for the Tres Riches Heuris, or the Vienna Hours of Mary of Burgundy. Zoom in until you can see the crackle in the vellum and the individual tooling in the gold. Wander through those borders. Find the master whose visual language speaks to you most powerfully. Was it the emotional storm of the Rohan master, the serene gardens of the Dresden Prayer Book master, or the clever illusions of the master of Mary of Burgundy? Then come back and tell us. Share in the comments which one of these 30 mysterious artists captivated you the most, and why your perspective adds a new chapter to their story. Thank you for joining this journey into the shadows behind the light. If you want to keep unraveling historical mysteries with us, please subscribe. There are always more stories waiting in the